Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Virtual Science Cafe. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in and joining us on this, what I hope is a fabulous Thursday night for you, as much as it is for all of us. My name is Chris Smith. I am curator for the Daily Planet Theater and your host for the Virtual Science Cafe every Thursday night, right here on the Museum of Natural Sciences YouTube channel. Normally, of course, we would be inside the Daily Planet Cafe for the Science Cafe in beautiful downtown Raleigh. We can't be there right now, so we're here bringing the show to you. We've been doing virtual cafes now since April, and it's been a great way for us to meet experts from all over the place and hear all kinds of great stories, learn about interesting research. For tonight's program, though, we have an entire panel of very special guests, but we didn't have to travel very far, at least as the crow flies, it seems, to get tonight's speakers. Even though the internet is bringing us all together, these folks actually are right here, close to Raleigh, North Carolina, and part of our museum community. We are going to be hearing, first off, from Dr. April Smith. April is the president of In Situ Explorers and was the editor on a book called 30 Great North Carolina Science Adventures. I know already you want to go find this book, right? You should probably have this book. I need to get this book because I want to know all 30 great North Carolina science adventures. I think if I tried, I could probably come up with a few off the top of my head, but I guarantee I'm going to learn about some new ones tonight. Part of tonight's panel, we have museum experts and more who are going to talk about their contributions to the book as well. But let me go ahead and bring into the program Dr. April Smith. April, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. I'm excited to be here tonight, and I'm so happy to be able to share this with the museum staff that contributed to the book. I do have some slides I want to show, so let me share those with you.
Yeah, let's jump right in. And I'll just preemptively say, for everyone that you're going to meet tonight, thanks all for joining us. Thanks for, I guess, contributing to the book to all of you. It's kind of a secret, right? I haven't introduced anybody yet. So, oh my gosh, who's here? Who's going to be a part of the show? Let me tell you, they're very special, smart, experienced people. You're going to learn a lot from them. And while we get April's screen share,
and you see
extra setup.
Is it up there for you?
I'm seeing the presenter view. So you might need to flip-flop them or move them around a little bit. Of course, the Museum of Natural Sciences in downtown Raleigh is full of exceptional people. I'm lucky to count myself a member of the team. I'm one of the less exceptional ones. We can get that out there to begin with. But you're going to hear from some really cool people.
Okay.
There it is. I see the book.
Okay. Terrific. Okay. So thank you again for having us today. And we are here to talk about this book. Here's the cover. This is 30 Great North Carolina Science Adventures. And I'll leave this up for a short bit while I kind of introduce a few things. And then I'll bring it back again in a few minutes with some more information about it. But first, I want to talk a little bit about how I decided to take on this project and why it's been so important to me. So I grew up on the Carolina coast. Salt marshes and oyster beds were my stomping grounds for as far back as I could remember. I loved everything about the ocean and coastal habitats. So when I left home, I did a master's degree at LSU in zoology, where I met my amazing husband, and then a PhD at FSU in oceanography. And that's where I studied the breakdown of organic matter in salt marshes and seagrass beds along the Atlantic and Gulf coasts of the Southeast US. So my husband and I both had a bit of wanderlust. We love to travel, we love to get out and see the world, and we really wanted to explore and wanted to see the world together and share those experiences together. And eventually, we wanted to be able to share that with our children. So we have made a concerted effort over many years to show the world to our kids and explore the way that we love to explore, exploring nature and sharing the science behind why the world is as it is. And that's where the inspiration for my nonprofit, In Situ Explorers, came about. and ultimately the inspiration for this book. I don't feel like kids in general are currently encouraged to explore much outside. I don't see it often in my kids' peers. And they're certainly not encouraged to explore without an adult, which has real value to it, and it can be done safely. This is a time in history when we need more people wanting to know more about the world and wanting to understand our planet and our environment. Teaching them about making observations and how to ask questions about the outdoors and about nature and about science are the beginnings to realizing that need. Encouraging young people to get out and explore for themselves, really fueling curiosity in the unknown, is important for all of us. So, as we were out traveling as a family, just doing the things that were important to us, I could see there was more developing in my kids than just travel experiences, places and events that they may not even remember later in life. It wasn't really about those specific places, and it wasn't remembering the trips at all. It was about learning to see the world as it is and understanding that it changes over time and that they have the power to affect that change, both positively or negatively, depending on their actions. So these types of experiences don't have to happen on the other side of the country or on the other side of the world. They can happen anywhere on a family road trip, at the park, or even in your own backyard. Making observations and asking questions are key basic skills that we really need to push, encouraging all ages to ask themselves, how can I make a difference? So back to the image of the book here. North Carolina is a treasure trove of natural resources. And some of our family's favorite explorations have occurred between the mountains and the coast in this amazing state. That is really how the concept for this book came about. And I strongly encourage all of you who are looking for science and adventure in North Carolina to purchase this book and follow its explorations, young or old. But if you have the ability to influence a child's learning and love for nature, this is a great resource for helping them to see that science and nature are truly fascinating. There were over 40 scientists, naturalists, and educators that contributed their vast amounts of knowledge to this book. And I was so fortunate to have all of their input. Art, Melissa, and Chris here are some of those contributors. They are from the museum, and when I called them, they all responded with a definitive yes, which made me so happy that they wanted to help out. And they've been so involved throughout the entire process. It is a true testament to the museum's commitment to science and nature education. And this is really my chance to thank them for committing their time and talents to this project. You'll hear from each of them shortly, but first I'd like to introduce Sarah Carrier, who is the assistant editor on the book. Early in the process of putting this book together, I contacted Sarah, who is an associate professor of science education at NC State. And she has been a fantastic sidekick the entire way. It's been such a pleasure to work with her on this project. So Sarah, I will turn it over to you now.
Oh, we can't hear you, Sarah.
Mute. Thank you. Thank you so much, April. I was so excited when April approached me about her idea for this project, and I've just jotted down some notes about some of the chapters that are from authors who are not speaking tonight that I wanted to share with you. In this process as an assistant editor, I've learned so much about the state of North Carolina, and I'd like to share some of that with you. So the book is organized starting in the mountains and then moving through the Piedmont and Sandhills east toward the coast. And all of the chapters are filled with really interesting facts and amazing photos. So I just want to share a few highlights with you before we listen to the authors. The book starts with a chapter by Andrew Eckert, called the Rock Garden, and he introduces us to the Forrest Webb Junior Outdoor Geology Laboratory, and we learn a lot throughout the book of the geology of North Carolina. Brad Daniels has a chapter on the Linville Caverns that is aptly subtitled Underground Wonderland. In it, we learn about an endemic species, which means that's the only place it lives, and it's a spider called the Linville Cavern spider. Brad also has a chapter on Mount Mitchell, which is the highest point east of the Mississippi. And in that, he talks about the island biogeography, so the study of species and community composition. And this image of an island in the sky is just fascinating. Cindy Carpenter writes about the legacy of conservation in North Carolina and the history of forestry in the Pisgah National Forest. Steve Hageman has a wonderful chapter about blowing rock geology, and in it are pictures that help us learn where to go and how to identify some of the geology in that and on blowing rock. As we move to the Piedmont, Catherine Stevenson writes about the Prairie Ridge Eco Station, which is one of the museum's gems in Raleigh, and Chris can tell you more about Prairie Ridge. Jessie Anderson talks about, in her chapter, about Pilot Mountain and the metamorphic rock quartzite that is part of how Pilot Mountain was formed. And reading about the various ecosystems on Pilot Mountain was really fascinating to me. Alicia Taylor writes about the North Carolina Botanical Gardens, and we learn about the botany in North Carolina. It's in my city of Chapel Hill. And we learn about Venus flytraps and some of the other carnivorous plants that are here in North Carolina. As we move to the Sandhills, Mike Dunn has a wonderful chapter on the Mammoth National Wildlife Refuge, which is one of the best bird watching areas in North Carolina. And if you have not had an opportunity to see the snow geese migration there, then it is something to read about and go visit. As we move to the coast, Hans Perel and his co-authors talk to us about Pamlico Sound and the Neuse River estuary, and we learn the importance of the wetlands ecology, as well as some of April's writing about wetlands and the importance in our state. Stanley Rigg and Dorothea Ames take us to the Outer Banks, and we learn about Cape Hatteras and the Barrier Islands, and learn a lot more about the coastal conservation efforts that are going on there. Every chapter in this book has so much rich information about North Carolina. It's an excellent resource and something that you can use as you're exploring the beauty of this beautiful state.
Excellent stuff. It sounds like the book is just chock full of incredible stories and insights on places to visit. So I think it would be time to dive into some of those places and some of those stories. First up, everybody, let me introduce one of the museum's coordinators of teacher education and a fabulous naturalist, Melissa Dowling. Melissa, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm going to go ahead and share some pictures that I have of one of my favorite places in North Carolina. And while that's coming up, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. As Chris said, I work at the museum. I've been there for more than 15 years as working with teacher education for more than 10 years. And it is my privilege to get the opportunity to share some of these amazing places that are covered in this really cool book with teachers from across North Carolina. And so a number of the places that Sarah just mentioned, I have spent a lot of time in. But the chapter that I wrote for the book was one of my very favorite places in North Carolina, the lower Roanoke River. I love to hang out in a swamp. And that is not something a lot of people can say. So really, you might ask, a swamp? So I wanted to just start out with an opportunity for you all to share a little bit back with us about what is it that you think of when you think of a swamp. So if you think about a swamp, share something in the chat. What comes to mind? And I'm going to introduce a little bit more about where I'm talking about while you all have the chance to respond to that question. So my chapter is about the lower Roanoke River. The Roanoke River is one of North Carolina's largest rivers. It carries more water than any other river in North Carolina. It flows mostly from Virginia, but out into the coastal plain of North Carolina. And one of the coolest things about it is that nearly 137 miles along the river downstream are preserved by lots of different land protection agencies, including with National Wildlife Refuges, with the State Wildlife Commission, the Nature Conservancy, and other private land easements. And it creates this amazing swath of protected land that is rich in wildlife and wild places. And you can see it hopefully in the satellite image that is up or will come up in a couple seconds, the big green stretch that parallels the Roanoke River in the coastal plain of North Carolina. And it is one of, like I said, one of my favorite places to visit because it is such.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Looks like we lost Melissa. That's too bad, too. I can't give her a presentation. Wait, Melissa's back.
I'm back. This is what it does sometimes when it doesn't like my internet speeds. I'm back. So what I was saying when my internet cut out for a second there was that it's a great place to experience wilderness along the Roanoke River. I'm going to try to share slides again. Hopefully I won't get kicked off. So in a sec, I'll sure hopefully we'll back up for you. But it's just an absolutely beautiful and wild place. Beautiful scenery, beautiful trees, beautiful water. And it's a place, you know, a lot of times you think about canoe camping or getting into wilderness, you think about like the boundary waters of Minnesota, or you think about up in Maine or something. But North Carolina has one of the most amazing places in the world, I think, to explore and canoe camp in a wilderness. And that is along the Roanoke River here. So Chris, I was curious, what were some of those comments? Do we get any comments about what people think of when they think of a swamp?
We sure did. In fact, we got a lot of comments on it. Some of them you might expect, like mosquitoes and lots of bugs. Renee, though, went right in for species, prothonotary warblers. Let's see, we got ogren, insects. Naina, I hope I said your name right, said mud, mosquitoes, mosquitoes, mosquitoes. Ooh, turtles, birds, alligators, and snakes.
Very nice. So that's good. A lot of people associate some of the same things I do with swamps. You know, growing up, I thought swamps were scary and dark and a little bit fascinating. I liked fantasy books. I still do. And, you know, they talk about like dark green tunnels. And that's, I think, why I like swamps so much. But I had one more picture of kind of wildernessy night skies. But then, yes, if you look close in a swamp, there is a ton of wildlife to find. Mosquitoes, yes, sometimes. Although I'll get to that at the end. Not always. But if you look closely, there's some amazing things. Renee, I think you said prothonotary warblers. They're a brilliant yellow bird. We call them swamp canaries sometimes, that come and nest in the swamps in the spring. The little guy on the right is a parula, northern parula warbler that nests in the Spanish moss that hangs from the trees. And they're just so fun to watch and listen to in the springtime. The swamps are also the home of tons and tons of barred owls. One of the platforms you can camp on there is called the Barred Owl Roost. And pretty much every night I've ever spent out there, I have been serenaded by barred owls. They nest in tree cavities and other places in the swamps, and they're an amazing sight to see. I got a couple little baby wood ducks up here. So there's also other sorts of birds nesting there. It's just a beautiful and wonderful place for birds. And there's also tons of herps, snakes like this brown water snake that'll maybe pop up for you in a sec, turtles, all sorts of things you can see along the river. So if you like wildlife, the Roanoke is also a great place to visit to observe and learn more about wildlife. In fact, it's one of the places in North Carolina that held out for a long time for wildlife when other areas were developed or overhunted. And turkeys hung on in that part of North Carolina longer than anywhere else in the state when they were overhunted. And a lot of the turkeys that we have now were reintroduced from animals that were found in the Roanoke River Basin. I think my audio might have skipped there. So Chris, did you miss anything?
I think we're okay.
All righty, great. One other thing I wanted to mention is that rivers like the Roanoke are really important for migratory fish species like American shad, which is the one I'm holding here on a shock boat, And on the right side is a picture of some shad eggs and fry. And the fish swim in from the ocean up the river to spawn and lay their eggs in the rivers, not just the Roanoke, the other major rivers in North Carolina too. And they, due to overfishing and pollution and the construction of dams, their numbers have dwindled, but there's a lot of reintroduction happening. We've been stocking fish in the Roanoke and the Neuse rivers in North Carolina for a number of years to try to bring their numbers back. So it's really a wonderful thing. Still work to do, but lots of good things to do. So now I know you all want to go to swamps. There's great ways to explore, and there's a lot of that in the book. You can go for a day paddle down there. You could also camp overnight on one of the platforms, which is one of my very favorite things to do. They're run by Roanoke River Partners. And the best times of year to avoid those mosquitoes are to go in the winter or early spring. And my favorite time of year is actually in April or early May. And that's, if you go a little too late in May, then you start getting into those mosquitoes. If you go earlier, you're usually okay. And then another time that's good to go is in the late fall. This was early November, a trip down there as well. And so it's just a beautiful and amazing place to spend some time in North Carolina. And I hope you'll definitely check it out. And I'm gonna pass it off back to Chris now.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay, I was looking at the chat and a whole bunch of people were talking about ogren, and I had no idea what that meant. They have clarified. Apparently swamps make them think of someone named Chad Ogren, who I don't know. Folks in the chat, let me know. I tried to Google it. I think it's a school teacher. So I'm going to guess that there's a whole classroom sitting in, and they had to be here to learn about swamps and science and nature in North Carolina. But yeah, chat box, keep me honest. Let me know what's going on, if it is appropriate to do so in a museum live stream program. Okay. Okay. Keep it there. I will remind everybody, leave your thoughts and comments in the chat. We're going to get to those at the end of the program too, things that you want to know. Let me introduce our next guest. Chris Goforth is the head of citizen science at the Museum of Natural Sciences. Chris, welcome.
Hello. I'm going to share my screen like everyone else, so give me just 1 second here. Come on. All right, can we
I
see
have
that?
confirmation that Chad is a teacher at Enloe High School who must love swamps. There we go. Back to you, Chris.
All right, can you see the picture?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm not going to give much of a presentation. I'm just putting some pretty pictures in the background more than anything. But thank you all so much for being here tonight. I'm really excited to be a part of this group tonight and to be an author on this book. I am a aquatic entomologist by training, and so I did not grow up in North Carolina. I moved to North Carolina specifically to take the job I have now, and had never even been here, but this is an amazing state and I love being here. There's so much wildlife here. I'm from the Rocky Mountains originally, and so I love the mountains in North Carolina in particular, but I was asked to write about the Haw River at Saxapahaw, and was given the option of writing about something aquatic. And so I wrote about aquatic insects. And I love aquatic insects because that's what I do. And so I'm going to just talk about insects and aquatic habitats here a little bit. One of the really great things about aquatic insects for me is that you can find them in almost any body of water that you go to. They're not very common in the ocean. You can find them right along the edges of the ocean and in some estuary type habitats, but they're not really in the ocean. But any sort of freshwater body, you are going to be able to find a lot of insects. This one is a mosquito, maybe less popular than some of the others. But these insects are in ponds, streams, they're all over our state. You can find them almost anywhere. So you can find them in the Haw River, which is the chapter that I wrote, but you can find them everywhere else too. I really particularly love the mountains because I'm a mountain girl, and the Pisgah National Forest is like my happy place. I love the water there. The insects there are amazing. This is a stonefly that was actually found in Raleigh, but stoneflies are a really great indicator of really good, clean water. And there's a lot of those in the mountains in North Carolina. And so I love stoneflies because they're maybe not quite as common as some of the other insects because you have to be in a really good body of water to find them in the first place. So getting to get into a mountain stream and look for bugs is just my happy place. And I hope other people really love doing that as much as I do. One trick about looking at insects is that there are some places where maybe it's not the best to do that. So I said I really love the mountains here. I really love Pisgah National Forest, but there are hellbenders in the creek there too, and in the river. So there's a really kind of protected habitat there. And so you have to be a little bit careful about where you go and what you collect and how you're interacting with these animals in the creeks. The hellbenders use the rocks that a lot of these insects like to be on. And so people are picking up the rocks all the time and it disturbs the hellbender habitat. And so you want to be really careful about where you are. And I really encourage people to practice leave no trace. If you're picking up a rock, put it back exactly where you found it. Try to leave all the animals unharmed where you found them so that they can continue on doing what they're doing. And then the next person that comes along and wants to see them will have a chance to see them as well. So one of the things I love about aquatic insects, apart from, they're telling us clean water and they're just so cool. There are so many things that aquatic insects do that are just so bizarre. They have so many weird habits and behaviors and characteristics and adaptations, but they're so easy to find and collect. So my favorite collecting gear are these two things. I love my soup strainer. These cost like $5 to $10. You can buy them at Target. I think I got this one at Ross, and it was very inexpensive. This is a great tool for collecting insects, and it's something that almost everyone already has or you can get very cheaply. And then this is my second favorite piece of equipment. You can use yogurt cups or beverage cups of any type. I wouldn't encourage you to take glass out into the field with you, but any sort of like a leftover sour cream tub or yogurt cup or anything is a great thing to put your insects in and take a look at them. And these are things that you can carry with you easily. They're small, they're lightweight, easy to bring with you when you go out in the field. So I would really highly encourage everyone to get out into the field, go to streams and ponds, dig around in there, see what you can find. The Haw River is a great place to find things, but you can find these kinds of animals almost anywhere. All of these photos are things that you can find in North Carolina. And so they're common animals, they're widespread, and they're a really great way to experience water and kind of really dive in and see something cool that's really dependent on a habitat that I really love. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Chris. All right, everybody. Let me bring on one more guest for you. He's the research curator for mollusks at the museum. It's Dr. Art Bogan.
Thank you, Chris. Let me share my screen. I've been working here at the museum for almost 24 years. And where do we go? Okay. So one of the things that's been a continuing theme is water. And with water, this is not, there we go. It is not cooperating. Here we go.
We're getting there.
We're getting there. Anyway, most people, when they talk about water, they talk about snakes or fish or amphibians, reptiles. But probably one of the more curious animals living in our rivers is the freshwater mussel. We have about 58 species that occur here in the state. And Jamie and I had a long chat about where would be the easiest and probably most instructive to go. So we chose Lake Waccamaw. It's shallow. It has several species living there. It's fun. You can walk 100 yards or better out, not even be waist deep. It's the, as you can see, the oldest lake. It's very shallow, Carolina Bay. And it's great for snorkeling. It's usually quite clear. And if you look carefully at the sand flats and down around the roots of the aquatic weeds, you'll find little black rocks. Well, most people think of them as rocks, but they're freshwater clams. They're Mother Nature's filtering system. Here are two, the what was an endemic, considered an endemic species, the top one, the Carolina slab shell, and the, oops, how do I go back? Anyway, they have an amazing, okay, this is not going well. Hang on. So what their Mother Nature's filtering system, and they show they're extremely long lives. Some of them living up to 200 years. So just because you see a mussel in its natural habitat does not mean that it's a new specimen, but could be the long one living there for a long time. These are unique in mollusks and bivalves especially. They have a parasitic larval stage on the gills or fins of fish, and they're microscopic. And they, well, people often say, well, they look like a Pac-Man. Well, for the older members of the crowd, and fish come in, they have different ways of luring fish in, whether it's mantle flaps or putting them out in gelatinous packets looking like fish eggs or larval fish, anything to attract a fish like a bass, bluegill. And they ride around on the gills for up to anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks up to 6 months. But I mentioned they're Mother Nature's filtering system. So here are two aquaria with stream water with substrate, both muddy. The one on the left has no mussels in it. The one on the right has about a dozen mussels in it. And John Alderman had taken a series of pictures over time to show the effect. After about 1 hour, they have almost completely cleaned the water, tremendously decreasing the amount of suspended silt, sediment, and other things in the water. Things they can't digest, they wrap up in mucus and they fall out of the bottom of the mussel. The others are moved by ciliary action to the mouth of the animal, digested, and then the fecal pellets are parasitized by other or used by other animals on the bottom of the river. So they're probably the largest of our native aquatic invertebrates, and they provide homes for shells, provide homes for crayfish. They're a host for a whole variety of leeches like seen below here, aquatic insects. So they're a very integral and very important part of a natural aquatic system. They also filter out heavy metals, large organic molecules. And one of the first questions we usually get when they're in the field is, can you eat them? Native Americans ate them. You see them in markets across Asia. I have yet to eat one, and I'm really hesitant considering where they live and some of the nasty things that they can accumulate. So whether you're in one of the rivers, we have 17 river basins here in North Carolina. So the fauna changes once you get into Western North Carolina, whether you're in the Roanoke or you're down in the Cape Fear, all sorts of things. There's a workbook on identification of freshwater mussels on the museum website with more information, and they're exciting little animals. They are not pet rocks. Thank you. I appreciate it, April, for the opportunity to participate both in the book and this evening.
Thanks, Art.
Excellent stuff. thanks everybody. For those of you watching online, I would think you might want to find a way to get a hold of this. And I think at the end of the show, or if you scroll up in the chat, everybody, you can find the link to UNC Press, where you can find the book, 30 Great North Carolina Science Adventures. And April was great enough to share a discount code with us as well. So look for that in the chat box. That way you can take advantage of it. But I think let's move into some conversation and chat about the process here a little bit. So April, I'm curious as to what made you reach out to certain people? Like, did you think, okay, I need to know about mussels in North Carolina, so I'm going to ask Art Bogan, or I need to know about aquatic invertebrates, so I'm going to ask Chris Goforth? How did you bring these people together?
Well, that's a good question, and it was a long process. I started by making a list of about 30 locations throughout the state that I thought were fascinating myself. I started in that manner by choosing one and looking for someone who had done research on it, someone who had maybe published and had some interesting information to share about that site, and then I'd contact them and see if they were interested in helping out with writing up a chapter. But the key here was all of the chapters needed to be easy to understand. This is a science book for everybody. This is not a science book for scientists. And so, and that's really the important part of wanting to share this with everybody, in that so many people, and I think young people in particular, are often put off by science or frustrated by it because they think it's hard. They don't really understand it, or whoever has been presenting it to them in the past has made it boring. And that's not the way we roll. We like interesting science. We like it to be fun. It should be interactive. To get someone interested in science, you really need to get out there and find what they can get their hands on, and they want to ask more questions. And so those were the people I was looking for. When I reached out to someone, if they responded back with comments that were curious to me and I wanted to know more, we would engage in a dialogue, and it worked really well. It was pretty easy to tell early on who was really interested in sharing science with everyone, and who was not. So I ended up with some really great contributors.
I mean, I think you got several of the best ones, but I am biased. I'm paid to be biased, as it would be. So when you approached like Melissa, Chris, and Art, did you said you gave them a location, and then were each of these people sort of free to just dive into everything about that place? Or, did you want the expertise that these people have, like, Art and mussels, Chris and, aquatic invertebrates, and Melissa in just knowing everything about the outdoors, it seems like to me. Was it discipline specific in that way?
So I did have specific disciplines that I really wanted addressed. I wanted the book to show that there are so many different disciplines of science that people can be engaged in, and sub-disciplines, which is why each chapter of the book goes through and says, okay, in this chapter you can learn about entomology and hydrology and et cetera. And so then that way you get an idea of what type of science you're interested in, and then perhaps there are some other chapters that have some similar types of explorations that could be taken on. But the first question I think you asked was, how did you approach writing these chapters? And so I knew early on that I had a sort of a format that I wanted, and I wanted it to be, I wanted each chapter to start with a little bit of history about the location, and then to go into lots of science and interesting science and things that would start getting people thinking. And then I wanted it to end with a little bit of information about what you do when you get there. How do you make this adventure happen? And they were all really great about following that. We went back and forth many times and just came out with some good stuff on the other side.
Excellent stuff. So next question that I've got, I think is going to be for Melissa and for Chris Goforth, because I know that in your jobs at the museum, you spend a lot of time taking people out into nature and doing activities all across the state and right here in Raleigh. And then you're writing about going into these places in other parts of the state and looking for aquatic invertebrates and looking for species and exploring swamps and that sort of thing. But Chris, you also mentioned this principle of leave no trace. And so when you're thinking about putting together activities that a family or a group of people or somebody might go out and do, how do you make sure that they know enough to respect the place, and the wildlife and the interactions that happen there, but also are able to, April's point, sort of get their hands dirty and explore and get into the science a little bit?
Well, I think for me, especially when I do, in-person programs where I'm actually out in the field with people, I try to practice leave no trace myself. So, I show people that I'm picking up a rock and looking at the insects, and then I put it right back down in the spot I took it out. I talk about what can happen to the animals a little bit if you're too rough with them, or but also let people know that they are not completely fragile all the time either. So there's a lot of people that are worried about handling things because they're worried about hurting them, and a lot of things are more robust than people think they are, but you also need to be careful with them and not harm them. They are a part of the environment and they're meant to be there. That's why they're there, and so you want to leave them there because they're an important part of the functioning of that place. And so if you want that place to stay the same, if you want it to stay nice like that for a long time, you need to keep everything there kind of in the condition that it's in, or better. If you can make it better, that's even more awesome. But I really just try to emphasize that as long as if you can't tell that you were there when you leave, I feel like you're doing the best you can. Do whatever you want to do while you're there, but put everything back, leave it the way it was when you got there, and I think you're going to have a good experience while not influencing that habitat too much.
Yeah, and I'll chime in too and just say that I think for me too, when I get to take people to places like the swamp or the top of Mount Mitchell, an important part of it for me is helping people to appreciate and understand and care about places that they're visiting. Because really, in order for people to take care of places, they have to care about them in the first place. They have to want to. And so trying to inspire that sort of concern through understanding and appreciation is one of my biggest goals in everything that I do. It's somewhat harder to convey in writing, I think. But at the same time, I think this book does a great job of kind of pulling in lots of different pieces of the story of different places to help people become more aware and begin to care for places. And visiting them and seeing them for yourself is one of the best ways to do that.
If I can chime in for a second, I appreciate Melissa bringing that up. That was a goal in the book, to make sure that although we are encouraging people to get out and explore and see these things for yourself, it's important to recognize your impact on the environment. And many of the chapters bring about a conversation where that environment has already been impacted. So how can we make it better? What can we do, and how can we teach others to move forward in a less impactful way, and in a mindful way to encourage conservation and an understanding of how the environment works.
And I'd like to jump in too, that each chapter has a section on before you go and how to prepare. And like Chris showed us, there are things that you can bring from home that are readily available, how to dress, very detailed directions, and also resources for where you can learn more. And because once you're there, then you want to learn more. So it is really an easy read. and just tons and tons of resources.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of the questions that came into the chat was, does the book give specific places to visit and activity instructions like for the aquatic insects? And it sounds like it does.
And I can
It's very
speak to that.
clearly laid out what to do.
It does. And thank you, Sarah, for bringing that up. That was one of the conversations that we had as we were kind of wrapping up each of the chapters. How do we make this useful? It's putting out the information is great, and having the explorations is exciting. But if you're not giving useful information on how to use that, then it tends to get lost. So we have tried to provide that information to make things a little easier. And even if it doesn't have all the details, there are contacts usually at the end of each chapter for who to get in touch with if you have more questions.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, I'm going to get more questions from the chat here because there's a couple of good ones for Art. You got people really excited about mussel biology because let's see, they want to know, I've got it here. John wants to know, are the heavy metals poisonous to the mussels?
Typically not. They're stored in the tissue, and in some cases they are able to kind of maintain them at an equilibrium. You take them out of that water, put them in another water, and if it has a much lower level of these metals, it may go down. That's a whole area of chemistry that I don't deal with, but there's another major area to think about.
That's interesting because another viewer wanted to know how mussel filtering works. Like, where do the suspended particles go, and do they just get compacted into the fecal pellets? Is that what happens?
That's an interesting question. I had an engineer call me the other day asking that same question. Freshwater mussels they have an in-current aperture where water comes in from the river, goes across the gills. It has two pairs of gills on either side of the foot, and each of those gills is covered with small papillae or actually cilia that are constantly beating in a particular direction. Larger particles move down the gill, fall off, or they get bound up in mucus, fall off the bottom of the gill. I don't know if they're able to sense what is organic and what's inorganic, whether it's leaf fragments or any one of the zooplankton or phytoplankton. They're moved forward, and they go through another sorting area on the labial palps, which is kind of like the lips around the mouth. It continues sorting, and then they go into an oral groove, which goes into the mouth, and then the sorting continues once it reaches the stomach, and there's a whole other process. So they look like a pet rock, and some people have said they look like rocks with guts, but there's tremendous amount of biology that we don't fully understand. So it's a continually sorting process. And finally, things like diatom shells or even live diatoms can pass completely through the digestive system and end up in the fecal material. Unlike most bivalves that form actual distinctly shaped fecal pellets, mussels have a structure in the lower rectum and the anus that these kind of, instead of pushing out an actual fecal pellet, it kind of disassociates as it leaves the animal. So it'll be maybe covered with bacteria. It's somewhat digested. These animals have cellulase in the stomach and the intestinal system. So people have asked the question, are these the termites at the bottom of the river that bring fine particles of organic material in and continue to break them down? But even having 58 species here in North Carolina, a large number of those are federally endangered. So yeah, but there's so much biology out there that we don't fully understand.
It's interesting that you bring up the diversity of species. There is a question here. Does the book contain field guides for species ID?
Yes, it started off in 2002 as kind of a workbook for classes, for seminars for consultants, other state biologists. And over the years, it's tried to keep up with changes in information. It's available on the museum website for free for download. And it has information on the taxonomy, the history, biology. It doesn't really go into in depth into the host fish for each species, but there's a key with pictures. There's a series of plates at the back. There's also one for South Carolina, and there's also one for Maryland on them. So if you're not in North Carolina, but our colleagues in the South or people from the South Carolina, there's one specifically. So you don't have to worry about excluding material species that don't occur in your state. But if you've got questions, go ahead.
Well, so so that's freshwater mussels of the Carolinas, right?
One is North Carolina and one for South Carolina. Yes, sir.
One from North. Okay, excellent. And that's at naturalscientist.org. There
Yes,
you go, folks.
Under mollusks.
For everyone else that's with us, what about the chapters in 30 Great Adventures? Did you provide species identifications? Are there like photos? So if somebody's got that book and they go out to Lake Waccamaw, are they going to be able to know one or two of the mussels they might find, or if they're in the Haw River, the macro invertebrates they may find, or the birds in the swamp?
Some of the chapters do go into detail on a little bit of taxonomy. I didn't want to get too bogged down with a lot of taxonomy. It depends on the type of science that the book is discussing, the particular field of science. There is one botany chapter that takes you on a walk through. It's the Elk Knob chapter, actually takes you on a walk through the path that hikes up to the top of Elk Knob, and it goes through so many of the different types of species of plants and trees that you'll see walking up there. So there is some of that. Other chapters just focus on one or two organisms that are important to that area.
I'm thinking about like Melissa writing a chapter on the swamp. It would be hard to write a chapter about a swamp without talking about a cypress tree, maybe. Even without having read it yet, I might guess that there's probably a note on how to identify a cypress tree because they're everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like in my chapter, I mentioned, yes, cypress trees, although they were covered in more depth in the Merchant's Mill Pond chapter. So you have to refer back. But yeah, cypress trees and water tupelo. But then I focused on some specific common species that I thought folks were most likely to see. And so talking a little bit about things you can observe, behaviors, or things to look for while you're out there. But I would definitely recommend taking a field guide or 2 or 3 or 10 with you when you go on some of these adventures, because you're always going to find things that we don't mention that you would maybe want to find out more about. And so if you're anything like me, you have, a whole assortment of field guides sitting right next to you at your desk that you really should not carry into the field because they're way too heavy. So take the smaller ones, but definitely take some with you when you go exploring.
And I should add to that some of the chapters, most of the chapters even mention specific field guides that would be good to carry along with you on that adventure.
Excellent stuff. Okay, this is a great question from John. What's your favorite adventure in the book? We might just go down the line here.
Oh,
which for me would be April. You go first.
Okay, that's the tough one. Oh my goodness, there's so many.
Favorite child, April. Come on, you can do it.
Or yeah, maybe I shouldn't be asking April, since as the editor and Sarah as the assistant editor, like picking one story, that's it might be too difficult.
I like Mount Mitchell is exciting for me. Merchant's Mill Pond is exciting for me. I am also a swamp girl, so I get that. Yes. Jockey's Ridge is really great. I don't know. There's so many good ones. I'm not sure I can choose a favorite. Anybody else?
Sarah, do you have one? Oh, we can't hear you.
Second time I've done that. Nor can I pick a favorite. I've given lots of highlights. There's one on Grandfather Mountain also that we haven't talked about that's interesting. I really like the ones that are from close to me that I've been a lot. So the Eno River and the Saxapahaw were really fun to read about to me because I've spent a lot of time there. And the Haw River was so full on Sunday of water. It was gushing.
We did get quite a lot of rain over the weekend, didn't we?
Mhm.
Let's see, Melissa, what do you think?
I don't know. I had
You
to
can
look
say
at-
your chapter.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to pick mine. It's other than mine. If you don't go to the swamp, I'm looking through the table of contents to make sure I don't miss any. But let's see. Can I pick one per region? I do.
You're like one per county.
Yeah, right. Every chapter. I don't know. I must say I am a huge fan of Mount Mitchell, especially in August at the highest point east of the Dakotas. It is usually at least 10 degrees cooler than it is at the base of Mount Mitchell, which is going to be like, I don't know, 20 degrees cooler than it is here. Like that's where I want to be right now. I don't know. Piedmont, oh, I have to say I probably am going with Pilot Mountain. It's just so iconic and the geology is so interesting. And it was my very first workshop for teachers with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. So it has a special place in my heart because of that. Bear Island on the coastal plain, nobody's mentioned that one yet, but Hammocks Beach State Park and Bear Island is one of the undeveloped barrier islands on our coast, and just a fabulous place. There's no cars on it. And so it's a great place to get away and see what our barrier islands looked like before we all built our houses out there and built our roads out there. So, and then, special mention, somebody mentioned Mattamuskeet and Poquoson Lakes out on the Albemarle Pamlico Peninsula near my favorite, the Lower Roanoke. I happen to have the author of that chapter here in the background, and it's a favorite place of both of ours. That's Mike Dunn, and it's a fantastic place. Swans, snow geese, bears. He saw 21 bears down there just yesterday. So you really can't go wrong.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, let's see, who's next? Chris, go forth.
Well, apart from the mountains just in general, because I love mountains, I work at Prairie Ridge, and so that's one of the chapters in the book. I love Prairie Ridge. If you haven't been there, I mean, we're currently closed, but someday we'll be open again, and it's a really great place to go, like in the Triangle area. That's a really great wildlife haven, and I love it there. But I am really particularly fond of the Green Swamp, and there's a chapter that features the Green Swamp. Having grown up in the southwestern U.S., I don't know why I always thought Venus flytraps were like African or Asian, but I did. My dad was even from North Carolina, and he never told me that they were native to North Carolina. And so when I first moved to North Carolina and learned they were here, I was just so excited about that. And that was actually my first trip out of Raleigh, was going to the Green Swamp with Jerry Reynolds at the museum and a bunch of interns that were there that summer. And it was just amazing. I mean, they're so small, they're so small, but it's so amazing to see them growing out of the ground. And that was just like a life-altering experience for me. So I have a very special fondness for the Green Swamp.
I should
Excellent.
probably add that Liz Baird wrote that chapter, and she was at the museum previously.
Art, what about you? Best adventure?
It's kind of hard. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in the foothills of the Cascades, so I'm really partial to mountains, but I love the barrier islands. And we have 17 river basins to play in, so there's lots of water out there for me to splash around in. I've not been, I hate to admit it, I've not been out to Mattamuskeet, so that's on the top of the list to visit. And I do a fair bit of birding during this lockdown. I've been sitting here watching the birds at the bird feeder here at home. So I'm like a kid in a candy store. I'm not sure which one to pick first.
Yeah, I think that might be my problem. I haven't been in North Carolina for that many years, and haven't made it to a lot of these places yet. I only recently made it out for the first time to Mattamuskeet last December and saw the enormous flocks of birds that hang out, over winter on the Pocosin Lakes. And it's amazing, just incredible stuff. North Carolina really is a treasure chest of nature and biodiversity in a way that I didn't know about even until beginning my career at the Museum of Natural Sciences and getting to be close to all of these great, smart people who've seen and done it all. Okay, there's another question here in the chat that I want to make sure that I get to because I think it's a helpful one for people. Do you know of any apps for smartphones or mobile devices that people could use to help with species identifications?
I am in love with iNaturalist. It is a citizen science capable platform where people can snap a photo of a species and it runs your image and your location through a algorithm and tells you what it thinks it is. It's free to use. It's a free app for Android and iPhone. And when you're sharing your observations, those are available to scientists and other people, just naturalists who are interested in finding out what's in an area can use it as well. You're sharing your information with everyone so that it can be used for scientific purposes and just for exploring. And I love that app. I use it all the time myself. That's been my big COVID project. I've been home documenting every species in my yard. And I think I'm up to like probably 300 or 400 species actually, just from wandering around my yard with a camera, which I think is pretty impressive.
I will definitely second that. I have, since we've started back in March, being at home, I started with the kids going out on walks down our greenway, and we look for everything. We take pictures of all kinds of stuff, and they get so excited about just being able to figure out what it is and learn a little more about it. And if they want to dig deeper, they can. It's a really, really great resource.
There is an app for freshwater mussel identification from North America. It's free. It's both for for iPhones and Android phones, both platforms. It's very easy to use. You pick the area of the country you're in, and it automatically narrows down the suite of species you have to begin with, and a very picture-oriented key, so it makes it very simple to use.
And I'll throw a Merlin Bird ID app out there too, specifically for birds. It's free from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and it has an amazing photo ID feature. So if you get a picture, even a fairly crappy picture of a bird, it can do a pretty good job of helping you identify it. And then you can also report it using the eBird app to the eBird Citizen Science Project as well, once you've identified it with Merlin.
Excellent stuff. Okay, one more question came in here, and it's somebody looking for species information, so I have to throw it out there. Okay, this person says they've never seen a Venus flytrap in the wild. Are they near the coast?
Yeah, they occur within about 100 miles of Wilmington. That's the only area in the entire world where Venus flytraps are found. They don't grow native anywhere else. Anywhere else you find them, they've been cultivated, grown there. It's a pretty remarkable thing. They go into South Carolina, so we can't claim them exclusively for North Carolina. But it's a pretty remarkable thing about our state that we have them here.
Thank you. April, how long did it take to pull this book together?
Oh my, 4.5 years to get it all together. Just there was so much that went into it, and so many different people. I think I mentioned there were over 40 contributors to the book. Most of those were a combination of writing and photographs, and I'm incredibly thankful for those of you with photographic skills that sent me such great pictures. You know who you are. I'll give a shout out to Mike back there. It took a long time, but it was worth it. It was such a great project. I enjoyed working with Sarah editing each of these chapters, and I just enjoyed working personally with each contributor on their particular subject, their particular niche of knowledge. It was so great to get to see a little window into each of those subjects and spend time on that. And so it was long, but I enjoyed every minute of it.
Well, thanks to all of you for being a part of the Science Cafe program tonight and sharing all of your stories and insights and expertise with us and giving us a little bit of behind the scenes on this great book.
Thank you, April. It's such a wonderful resource.
Thanks. I appreciate each one of you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight too. Yeah, it's been fun.
So everybody watching, you can drop clapping hands emojis into the chat box to express your gratitude for all these great people. And I'll say that you can find out a lot more about these places, right? The book is 30 Great North Carolina Science Adventures from UNC Press. And if you scroll up there in the chat, you can find the link to the website and the discount code for the book that April shared with us. Take advantage of that. Pick up a copy of this book. I think you'll all enjoy it. And hey, while you're there on the web picking up a copy of this book, check out naturalsciences.org. There are lots of great resources: science, nature, the environment, lots of different topics. You can find archives to past video resources there as well. So you can go back through our Science Cafe archive and all sorts of expert lectures, science experiments you can do at home. Our website is a great resource for stuff, and you can learn more about some of the experts that you met here tonight, like Melissa, Chris, and Art. Many thanks to all of you again for participating. This was fabulous. And I hope that I get to see all of you again real soon in person. That would be great, wouldn't it? Maybe one day soon. Until next time, if you want to know what's happening coming out of the museum as well, I got to remind everybody, you can follow the Museum of Natural Sciences on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at Natural Sciences on all 3 platforms. And you can subscribe to the museum's YouTube channel here. Click the bell to get notified. And when we're going live with more great live virtual events just like this one and more cool stuff that we do, you'll get the notification so that you can join us and be a part of all the cool science and nature stuff happening out of your Museum of Natural Sciences. So until next time, thanks everybody. We'll see you again soon. Stay safe. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, April.